and hilarious in equal regard, because welcome to one of the more highly anticipated cars of 2020, the Toyota Yaris GR. Never did I ever expect the words Toyota Yaris and one of the most expected cars of the year to leave my mouth, but here we are, and by the grace of Gazoo, these boys have done the magic. I'm just casually threading this down a wet, and I mean wet, greasy, tree-lined, leaves on the road, British B road, height of grime of November here in the UK. This is no exaggeration when I say I honestly don't think I could thread a GT3 down here like this during this time of year. That is somewhat of an important thing to say this time of year, because if anything, this is where this car really comes into its own. It's amazing the amount of grip that Toyota and Gazoo Racing, that's what GR by the way stands for, has managed to create and develop with this car. It's outstanding. Anyway, a little bit of an overview on the specs, and then let's hop back to the driving dynamics, shall we? So first of all, despite the fact that this car is called a Yaris, the only component that it actually shares with a Yaris is the front and rear lights and the aerial. It stops there, and crikey can you tell. The chassis is bespoke, the transmission, the drivetrain, well, I've just summarized it. Every single component of this car, every body panel, everything is developed from the ground up to, first and foremost, and this is the significant point, first and foremost, be a platform for a WRC car. Now, the GR bit that I just mentioned, Gazoo Racing, just so happens to be headed up by a bloke called Tommy Mäkinen, who just so happens to be one of the most successful World Rally Championship drivers ever, winning 4 titles. And he has had his hand all over this from day one. You can tell. You see, in WRC going forward, the rules have somewhat changed. In the past, in the glory days of the Group B rally cars, the homologation specials were very small production numbers. But for the future, you have to make a high volume production car of which the rally car will be based on. So while this is a homologation special, they're making over 20,000 of these cars. Anyway, back to Tommy. What Toyota have done has done it in reverse. They've looked at the rules and gone, well, we need a road-going rally car. So rather than adapting a car which they currently have, they've gone and thought, do you know what, let's just build a rally car for the road, and then we'll adapt it and go racing with it. Hence why this thing shares absolutely no fundamental components with an actual Yaris, thankfully. And then you've got the chassis, and oh my god, do we have the chassis. It's over 60 mil wider at the rear, it sits 45 millimeters lower, and the composure of it, the way it's been welded, is entirely for structural rigidity. The torsion of this thing is fantastic when you're flowing across these B roads, and honestly it feels like the car is being developed specifically for the Great British B road, because the way it glides over at its speed, and we need to come to that shortly, it has an operating window where it's well and truly in its element. Now, while I'm driving through this sleepy village going steady, I'm going to draw a very odd analogy as to how this car feels. So liken it to a speedboat or a jet ski. At lower speeds, they're okay, but it's not until they begin to plane, they find their plane, and they have an operating window at speed where they become nimble, agile, incredibly fast, and they just operate in a completely different area. Now, I'm not saying that this at low speeds is bad by any means. In fact, at low speeds, it only takes you a few hundred yards to realize that you are at the helm of something so far removed from a Yaris, you can but applaud. So as a daily driver, great. It just doesn't feel anything particularly outstanding, aside from the fact that the steering weight is great and the brakes, we'll touch on those shortly, the brakes are amazing. No, the Yaris GR comes into its own when it finds its plane. Oh my god, when you get up this thing, the way that it dances over a road surface, I'm not exaggerating. A 911 GT3 in conditions like this, wet, slippy, grimy, away from this car. I'm not joking. The amount of traction it's got, the composure over the road, and the number one word here is confidence, because it gives you as a driver so much confidence to lean on its ability that you end up looking down at the speedo going, surely that is in kilometers an hour, because the momentum that this thing allows you to carry is bonkers. Now, engine, granted, on the surface doesn't sound like the most exotic of engines. 3-cylinder, 1.6 litre. Now, for a spot of context, this just so happens to be the most powerful 3-cylinder production engine in the world. And before Koenigsegg fans chirp in and go, actually the Gemera, blah, 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 until Koenigsegg have actually produced one, this still stands. So it's currently the most powerful 3-cylinder production car engine in the world. Develops 257 horsepower, 266 pounds-feet of torque. And while those numbers might not sound big, when you put it into the context of its weight, which is just 1,280 kilograms, and the fact that it has brain-scrambling traction. I mean, the track pack, which this car is spec'd as, comes as standard on Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tyres. And together with its all-wheel drive and super fancy diffs, front and rear, it has Torsen diffs which just grips the tarmac. It like actually gets a handful of the tarmac with every rotation of the tyre. It just sticks. It's unbelievable. So when you put all of this together, don't focus on the 3-cylinder, don't focus on the 257 brake, which a few years ago would have been acceptable. Focus on the fact that once this car gets going, I mean, 0 to 60 is just over 5 seconds, still respectable. Honestly, forget all of that stuff. Once this thing finds its plane, good God, honestly, there isn't much that this thing wouldn't keep up with. Now then, here is a subtle detail that, for me at least, summarizes so much about the ethos and attention to detail of this driver's car. You see, it's very rare for a road-going car, even a supercar and most sports cars, to allow you to left-foot brake under a trailing throttle. That's braking at the same time as accelerating. I know that sounds completely counterproductive, but there are situations on cars which are set up right, which allows you to left-foot brake, say as you're working your way through a corner. It allows you to trim its line, build up friction against the brakes, and as you're approaching the apex, you can get off those brakes with a well-balanced car, which importantly has allowed it to hook up against this four-wheel drive system and then slingshot yourself after the apex. It is an amazing feeling. Now, most hot hatches, even the hottest of hot hatches, simply don't like that. If you try it, it just sort of goes, oh God, ECU kicks in and goes, no, you're not supposed to be doing that. This is designed and built to do it. So when you do it, God, it feels good. It is so rewarding. It's like as you're working your way into a corner, rather than having a heavy lift off a throttle and upsetting the balance of the car, you can subtly left foot brake it, trail that line in, and it loves it. Not only does it not make a stink about it, it actually rewards you for it. It feels so good, particularly when you put it into sport mode. And this is probably a good time to talk about the 3 different driving modes. So as you start the car, it begins in its default mode, which is appropriately named normal. And even in normal mode, traction is absurd. However, we have 2 other modes, sport and track. Now, track provides 50-50 drive to front and rear axle, and in that mode, the left foot braking situation in the right scenario, in the right corner, feels incredible. And then, if you want to have the car sort of dance around a little bit more, you can knock it over into sport, and that allows for 70% of the drive to go to the rear axle and 30% at the front. And then we have the weighting of all the stuff you interact with. Steering, throttle, brake, clutch, and gear shifter. Now, what they've done a great job of is matching the weights of everything. So the steering's got some great feel to it. The brakes, the modulation of the brakes is amazing. In fact, the brakes actually is also one of the defining characteristics of the car. It stops fantastically well, and that again is another benefit of less weight in this thing. As is the acceleration. When that little turbo spools up, there's plenty of torque to ride. And then you've got the weight of the clutch, which isn't hollow and fluffy and light like it would be in a standard Yaris or most hot hatches. No, it's got some proper weight to it, which is nice. And then the gearbox, proper snick-snack, positive short throw box, and it all comes together really nicely as it begins to flow. You're interacting with it all. It all just has a very nice synchronization between all of the instruments that you interact with. It's a great, great feeling car. Now the stuff that I don't like, oddly, because this is a driver's car, I'm finding the pedal placement for heel toe to be pretty poor actually. There's a gap so big between brake and throttle that your whole foot can fit through it, and you find yourself having to literally heel and toe, which at the majority of road speeds probably isn't the most comfortable experience. When you get right up it and you can lean on those brakes a bit more, and you've just got a footful more of that brake pedal, the literal heel and toe isn't so bad. But for the majority of cases on the road, they just feel a little bit far apart. And that brings me on to the silly little button that they've got down here called the IMT, which is short for Intelligent Manual Transmission, which is code for I can't heel and toe, please do it for me, despite the fact that I've bought a driver focused car. Get rid of that button. That's really counter, I think anyway, to what this car sort of stands for. Maybe they thought rather than closing the gap between throttle and brake pedal, we'll just put in a button for those people that don't like doing it. And then there's the interior. I mean, refinement, it is lacking. You'd find less plastic in a box of Lego. However, it does have a pretty comprehensive infotainment screen with Apple CarPlay. So you plug that in and all of a sudden the whole sort of dash comes alive, and you can get on Waze or Google Maps and use Spotify, etc. And then there's one tiny other thing, which isn't a massive deal, but by the fundamental design of a hot hatch, it has quite a flat back on it. And what that does when it's dirty and wet, the way the air exits the rear of the car, it ends up slapping a load of dirt on the rear windscreen, which fine until it slaps enough on that you can't see out, and there's no windscreen wiper or washer to clean the rear windscreen to see out of it. It's not a problem that often, but while I'm driving it in this dirty November day down these country lanes, rear window just became redundant. But honestly, all that being said, once you face forwards and you get up this thing, you're not thinking about anything other than how fantastic the driving dynamics are and just how much traction you can get. Honestly, track pack, if you're going for one of these, you've got to go track pack. It basically stiffens up the car, provides you with PS4S tyres as standard, stiffer anti-roll bar, forged alloys. It's just great. And there's another thing which is cool, the handbrake. I mean, when was the last time you saw a handbrake in a new car? Not that that's a cool thing, but what is cool is that it's actually designed to work. When you put on the handbrake, it actually disconnects the drive from the rear wheels, allowing you to do big handbrake turns. And then finally, let's just touch on the price, because I've seen a lot of murmurings online going, what, 30 odd grand for a hot hatch? You got to get that out of your brain. Just because it says Yaris and it resembles a hot hatch, what you can't see is what's underneath this thing. What you're paying for is not the Yaris bits or the hot hatch bits. What you're paying for, annoyingly, is the stuff that I can only describe to you. Once you feel it, you're just going to have to take my word for it that this is so far removed from your average hot hatch. I actually think 30 odd grand makes this feel good value, just in terms of the driving pleasure that it provides. To get something similar to this, you're in the world of sports cars, and then you're sort of way up. I mean, it might be likened to something like the Alpine, the A110, for example, in terms of similar driving enjoyment, which, you know, 50 grand car, and that doesn't have a manual gearbox, which for me is the biggest letdown of that car. Whereas this, everything is designed to engage. And you've got a little plaque down here which says developed for FIA World Rally Championship. I mean, that's worth 30 grand alone. To summarize its engineering and its build, Toyota say it takes 10 times longer to build a Yaris GR than it does a standard Yaris. That gives you an idea of the amount of effort which has gone into the engineering of this car, and it is the mechanical engineering of this car. Static, to sit in it, you'd go, I don't know, I can't imagine this being this good. And then it just completely blows your face off. But honestly, after everything that I've just said, I think the greatest thing about this car is the fact that it even exists at all. Because we're in a bit of a sanitized state of the world right now. Everything's so focused on CO2 emissions and making cars more normal. It's getting quite depressing, actually. So this is one of those really rare moments where a manufacturer delivers on its promise of giving us something truly special. And I know it might not look like it from the outside, but honestly, give this thing a chance. It's just brilliant, and we should really celebrate the fact that it exists. Because on a day like today, when the sun's out but the road is wet, I don't think you're going to have anything that provides as much fun or confidence as this little Yaris GR. As always, guys, thanks so much for watching, and I shall see you next time.